All right, the first thing I'm going to ask you about is you flying your own plane. As someone who has a very difficult time with commercial air travel and can't quite yet afford to fly private, when we were doing this booking, someone on your team said, "Oh, well, Bradley's plane is in the shop, so we might have to move the jet." I was like, "Planes? So he's going to like fly from his house to the Austin airport on his own?" It's so fascinating. How did that come to be?
It's faster that way.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah. Well, and you never miss a flight either if you're the pilot.
Right.
Just convenient.
It's not going anywhere without you.
It's not going anywhere. Well, I think I really started getting interested in aviation when I was about 10 years old or so. My cousin Rick, who was my best friend, had an interesting situation. His dad worked at the Air National Guard. This was in Great Falls, Montana, where I grew up. And so starting around age 10, when he would have a birthday, we would go up to the Air National Guard and they'd show us a movie about aviation. And then they'd have these, big fighter jets, F-106 Delta Darts sitting in the hangar that were just awesome, for a 10-year-old kid. And then the governor's airplane was an old DC-3, like the paratrooper airplane, that in some of the war movies, they used in D-Day and so on. That was the plane that he had. And we got to do whatever we wanted in that plane. So we could put on the oxygen masks and, breathe the oxygen and, and do all kinds of fun stuff at that age. So I got really interested in aviation. And when I was first in practice, I started taking lessons in Long Beach and I soloed. And then I thought, back then it was all the steam gauges, just all the round dials. And I, being a computer programmer before, I was in chiropractic school. I thought, I'm going to come back to this when the technology's all caught up, because eventually it will catch up. And so when I turned 58, it was on my birthday, and I'm sitting there reading Plane and Pilot, and I finally realized, I'm getting older. I better hurry up and do this. So I did. I got my license, and then I've had 3 different airplanes since then, company airplanes, but I'm the company pilot. And so we actually we flew across the Atlantic last summer in the airplane. We can't go straight across because we have a small plane, but we fly to Greenland, and then we fly to Iceland, and then to Scotland, and then that gets us over there. So then and we're planning on doing that again this year. We go over there and we teach seminars on the emotion code and the body code and travel around, and it's really amazing. Really fun.
That is so cool. I've only been in a really small plane once. I was a kid, I don't know, maybe 10 or 11, and my dad is from Colorado, and he, for, 40 years, was an avid hunter. And so he'd, hunt deer, elk, bear, whatever. And even at this time, I thought this was kind of unfair, but they would take a plane up. It was outside of Aspen, Colorado, and they would take a plane up to go spot elk. And so they'd fly over the Rocky Mountains and see where the elk herds were, go land the plane, and then pack in their horses and mules to go hunt them.
Sure.
And up in that plane, man, I don't know if it was the turbulence or what, but I remember just getting really airsick and terrified, because we're, you got to make quite a lot of maneuvers to get in and out of these canyons and stuff in the mountains. And that was, the last time I ever did that. Not that I ever had an invite, but it was kind of terrifying. And then about a year ago, some friends of ours chartered a private flight to Costa Rica and invited my wife and Allison and I. And I almost didn't want to do it because I knew it would spoil me. I'll never be able to. Yeah. I already hate flying commercial, even if I have good seats. It's just like, it's such a production, And I was right. There's like a smaller airport near the Austin airport, the private, whatever strip. And you roll your car up right to the plane. A porter grabs your bags, throws on the plane. No x-rays, no TSA. Bring your water bottles, glass, big bottle, whatever you want. Mm-hmm. Someone valets your car, you get on the plane. Within 10 minutes, you're taking off.
Right.
It's just, I was like, oh man, I knew it was going to be this great.
Yeah, it kind of ruins you.
It really does. So after that, I was like, okay. And it's not even, a lot of people, I think, I didn't like post pictures on Instagram. Hey, I'm flying private. It has, to me, nothing to do with status, just freedom of movement and comfort.
Yeah.
So that's one motivator for me to become wealthy enough to fly private. It's like, I don't care about Rolex watches, none of the accoutrement of wealth, but the freedom of movement is definitely something I value.
That's what it is for us too. Because I get a lot of requests to do podcasts and things like this, and interviews and documentaries and things. And with our own airplane, it's so easy to get there. And it's so much faster, really. I mean, it's about 3 hours from where I live to here, but going home is going to take us all day, for example.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, get to the airport 2 hours early, right? Go through TSA, all that drama. And I'm always like fighting them because I don't want to walk through the radiation machine, the millimeter wave things. I hope I get the TSA pre-check so I can just go through real quick through the normal metal detector. Right. But if that's shut, then I got to opt out and get pat down and borderline molested. It's just like a shit show. Mm-hmm. And then canceled flights, delayed flights. And then if you miss your connection, I mean, it's just like, going from, especially in Texas, because it's such a big state, to get here to even a couple states away can be like an 8 or 9 hour day when it's just right there. It's not that far as the crow flies.
As the crow flies, yeah. And it's one of my favorite things about flying is it requires all of your attention and all your focus. So there's kind of a Zen aspect to it for me. I love it. You can't ever really reach the end of it. It's kind of like energy healing in that you never really, or like a lot of things. Like
meditation.
Yeah, like meditation. You never really reach the end of it. You can always improve. You can always get better. And the eye candy just never ends. I mean, just breathtaking things that you get to see all the time from this vantage point that most people will never see. And it's interesting because no matter how cold and gray and rainy or foggy or whatever it is on the ground, that if it's during the daytime, you're going to climb up above that, and eventually you're going to pop out and you'll need your sunglasses because it's going to be bright and sunny.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of an allegory for sticky and difficult emotional periods of life, right?
Yeah.
It gets cloudy and it's difficult to remember when you're in the midst of a period like that there's sunshine just on the other side of that cloud cover.
Right.
So I always remind myself that. I learned that from David Hawkins. That's one of the analogies he gave, to kind of your relationship with God, right? It's even when you feel forsaken, it's just that there's blocks between you and that experience. It's not that God or consciousness has gone anywhere.
Right.
We're just unable to see it temporarily.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, I got one really off-the-wall question. I know all this is off-topic than what we're going to talk about. In the past couple of years, there's been a lot of content, most of it being pretty suppressed and censored, around space travel, the moon landings, supposed moon landings, which I'm very skeptical of at this point, but also in the shape of the Earth. There's some pretty compelling evidence out there now that's quite convincing to me that what we've been told about cosmology in general and the Earth being a ball floating aimlessly through space is pretty suspect. One of the most compelling arguments that I've heard for that is that, and you'll be able to correct me on this instantly as a pilot, is that if we lived on a giant ball, airplanes would have to be consistently accounting for a slight descent in order to stay in the appropriate elevation from the ball. Meaning, if you're flying across a plane, like airplane, then you would be flying totally straight from point A to point B. But if you were going over a curve, you would have to set your bearings so that you were always kind of nose tip down in order to remain at the same elevation. Does that make sense?
Well, I think that that might possibly be true if the Earth were much smaller. But no, as I'm flying along in an airplane holding a certain altitude, like 30,000 feet, for example, that isn't anything that I've really ever noticed. However, what's interesting about this that comes to mind is for a satellite to maintain its orbit or to achieve orbital velocity, which is about 17,500 miles per hour, I guess. What happens is that at that certain velocity, there's a certain velocity that they reach where if they go faster, they go off into space, or if they go slower, Earth's gravity pulls them down. But at this certain velocity, they call it orbital velocity, the whatever it is, the spaceship is kind of continually in a state of falling around the Earth. And that's what orbit is. It's like continually falling around the Earth. So I don't know. I know that there are a lot of arguments for the flat Earth and so on. As a pilot, none of them have ever really made sense to me. I mean, if I'm up at 30,000 feet or higher, you can start to see the curvature of the Earth on a really clear day. So anyway, I don't know.
I've always wanted to ask a pilot that. Every time I get on a plane, I'm like, I'm going to do it. And then I chicken out, go knock on the door. Hi, sir, can I talk to the pilot? I'm just curious. I want to meet the pilot,
I'm pretty sure the Earth is round.
I want to ask them, do you have to descend in order to stay at the same altitude? That's always been a question I wondered. So.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, when you're above 18,000 feet, you have to be on autopilot. When you're up in above 29,000 feet, you have to be on autopilot. And so the autopilot is continually making corrections to that. So I suppose, there's a remote possibility, but okay. I think the Earth is pretty round, actually.
Okay, noted. Thank you for entertaining me with that question.
Sure.
I like to come up with weird questions and kind of, hopefully surprise people.
And I think a lot of my fellow pilots will back me up on this.
Okay, good. Well, I'm still someday going to get up the courage to ask, an international commercial pilot that goes a distance all in one shot. Another weird thing about it, and then I'll move on from this, is when you look at some of the emergency landings, say going from, Argentina to Australia or something, they'll make an emergency landing in LA. It's like, but I don't know, it just makes no sense when you start looking at it, on a round Earth map. It's like, why do they go all the way up there when there's another continent right across they could stop at? Those ones confuse me too.
Yeah, for example, if you look at New York to Paris, if you were to draw a straight line on a flat map, you'd be going straight across the ocean. But if you actually look at the routes that are used, because the Earth is round, those routes, they find the shortest routes are actually up like near Greenland and Iceland and across that way, kind of going up the north. But if you take the globe and you rotate it so that that appears to be a straight line, that's how the straight line ends up, precisely because the Earth is round. So it's interesting. I've got an app I can show you on my phone.
Okay.
We can look at later.
I'd love to look at that. All right. So let's get into, the body of your work. By the way, I'm really excited to have you on because I've been aware of the emotion code, and your latest book was the body code, right? Which I don't have a copy of that yet, but many people in the audience will be familiar with the emotion code. In some part that we had our mutual friend, Frank Ellariti, on the show a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And that was the basis of that conversation as a practitioner. And so I think, he did actually a session for me during that. And then he gave me the magnet.
Oh, yeah.
Here we go. At the end of that, which I kind of use, not knowing anything about what I'm doing. So I'm excited because I really feel that this overarching message that so many of the physical ailments that people experience are really based in the trapped energy of unhealed emotions, and I know in my life, having experienced a fair amount of emotional and some physical trauma, that as I've worked through those things, even not using the emotion code, but just with various modalities, that I've become more vital and healthy and resilient physically. So there seems to be a very obvious connection here. And I think the difficulty, perhaps, and you'll be able to elucidate this further, is the Newtonian allopathic Western medicine model is very myopic and reductionist, compartmentalized. And there are a few people now, like you, thankfully, who are looking at the human physical body, emotional body, spiritual body in a much more comprehensive way and seeing those connections. So maybe we could start with the basic premise of how our emotional experience affects the physical manifestation of health.
Absolutely. Well, I practice as a holistic chiropractor for about 18 years or so. And I've kind of always been a little bit OCD. I was really obsessed with really getting to the underlying causes of what was wrong with my patients. And in the early stages of my practice, people were coming in to see me just with primarily physical pain, carpal tunnel, headaches, migraines, things like that, back pain. And I was able to help them. But then as time went on, I began to see things that were a little more complicated. And I was always really striving to figure out what were the best ways to help people, right? And I was open to anything. So I was studying ancient things and modern things, and anything that I could find, anything that I heard about, I would track down. And I kept the things that worked and discarded the things that didn't work. And this gradually led me to into energy medicine, really, and to understanding more about energy medicine. And it was a really interesting journey. When I first started learning about emotional energies and how they become trapped in the body. And by the way, this took a long time. It wasn't like a sudden thing. It was just a slow, gradual process, really trying to build on all the other knowledge that had been gained up until that point about all of this. But I had a beautiful laboratory. The laboratory was my practice. And I had people coming in all the time, every day, all day long, with different kinds of problems going on. So I had this perfect environment where I could test things and try to figure things out. And I remember, as an example, I had a patient that came in to see me one day who thought she was having a heart attack. And she had crushing chest pain, difficulty breathing. Her left arm was totally numb. Left side of her face was numb. And it looked like a heart attack. I told my staff, we might need an ambulance. Stand by for 1 minute. Let me just do some testing on her. And so using what is now called the emotion code, back then it was, I didn't call it anything. It was just asking questions and trying to get answers from the subconscious mind of the person, which we can talk about a little bit more in a minute. I found that she had an emotional energy of grief that was causing this. And luckily, our office was right next to a medical center. So if we needed to get her over there quickly, we could. But I just wanted to see if there was something emotional going on, and there was. And her subconscious mind needed to know a little more about this, or it needed to have a little more brought to conscious awareness about this. And we determined that through the muscle testing. So this all took about less than a minute, really. And I found that she had this emotion of grief, and it went back 3 years. That's when it had occurred, 3 years before. And she broke down crying. She said, I can't believe that's affecting me. I thought I dealt with all that. And I said, well, what happened to you? She said that 3 years before, her husband had been having an affair. And she found out about it and confronted him with the evidence. And the marriage blew up. And that was the beginning of the end of that marriage for her. And so she had she spent about a year in therapy and dealing with it mentally, and had even gotten recently remarried. So as far as she was concerned, that ex-husband was just her ex-husband. He did her wrong and betrayed her and so on. But as far as her body was concerned, that energy was still right there. And so I released that. And we release an energy like this by just swiping a magnet or your hand right down the middle of the back or over the head like this, using the governing meridian, which is a little river of energy that flows from the tailbone up over the top of the head to the inside of the upper lip. And I just did that a few times down her back. And all of a sudden, within 3 seconds, the numbness disappeared in her arm and in her face. And all the feeling came back. And all the chest pain was gone. And all the difficulty breathing was gone. And she left the office about 10 minutes later after joking with me and my staff. And I remember after she left, sitting down at my desk and thinking, what did I just witness? Was that real? What just happened? Now, she is still, she's a friend of mine. We've been connected for a long time now. And she has a horse ranch. That was probably 30 years ago. She has a horse ranch up in Oregon. But here's the thing, okay? Luke, I think that if we had not done that, that energy was so powerful that simulating a heart attack at that point. And I think if we hadn't released that energy, it might have been the end of her at some point in the future. And nobody would have realized that what killed her really was her husband's affair. See? So this is kind of my introduction into this world of how these energies affect us. And so basically, here's how to think of it. First of all, you have to understand that, and you mentioned the industrial model and Newtonian physics, which has been great. It's gotten us this far. But now we're entering into the world of quantum physics, where we're beginning to understand that these bodies of ours are more than just a collection of all these various different parts. Our bodies are they're divine in origin, and they're made of energy. And so when you're experiencing an intense emotion on a quantum level, what's happening is you're feeling a particular frequency or a particular vibration. Every emotion has its own frequency and its own vibration, right? Anger is different from sadness, and they're all different. Well, here's how it works. We experience emotions all the time, every day, right? And when you experience an emotion, it's in response to some kind of a stimulus that happened. You thought about something, or you saw something, or someone said something to you, or whatever. And a certain emotion, a certain vibrational energy starts to come up for you, and you start to feel that emotion. And you might think the thoughts that go along with that emotion. You might even feel some physical sensations with that emotion. And then most of the time what happens is we acknowledge that emotion, and then we just kind of allow it to dissipate its energy and go away. And that's like opening and closing a loop. The emotion begins, you start into this loop, you acknowledge it, and it dissipates its energy and goes away. And so the loop is closed on that emotional experience. And now that experience is done, and you're ready for the next experience. But what happens is, if the emotion is really, really powerful, if it's overwhelming, or if you choose to make it overwhelming, which we do sometimes, right? We decide, gee, I'm not only a little bit resentful, I'm really going to be resentful, or whatever. We enhance those emotions sometimes in an inappropriate way. That can break that loop process. So now you have an open loop, and the energy of that emotion that was trying to be expressed is now kind of suspended in the body. This also happens if an emotion is coming up for you, and you decide, no, I'm not going to go there, and you just stop that loop from processing. That also will create an open loop. And so the emotion code is just a way to find these open loops, right, and close them. And so, there have been so many interesting experiences. And when I was in my practice, what I found, to my astonishment, was that the vast majority of physical pain that people were experiencing was due to emotional baggage, trapped emotional energies. And I found that by releasing those energies, the pain would decrease radically, or just sometimes disappear instantaneously. And to understand how this is even possible, though, we have to really back up. When I was in practice, actually, we have to back up even further than that. Starting in about in the early 80s, I became a computer programmer. I took a class. I was going to school in Hawaii, and I needed one more class to round out my schedule, and it was a class on basic programming. So I didn't know what that meant. I had no idea, but I took the class, and I just immediately became totally head over heels in love with computers, right, and programming, as simple as it was back then. And so I taught myself how to program computers, and that was the beginning of this kind of a short career for me as a programmer. And I had a business called The Computer Tutor, which I thought was really clever. And back in those early days, I would go into people's businesses, and they'd have a new IBM PC, for example, that they'd bought for their business, and they wouldn't know what to do with it. There was no software then. And so I would look at the flow of their business and how everything worked, and then I would write the software that they could use. It was all just, pretty simple stuff, but it worked. And I had a lot of fun doing that. And just as an aside, I remember to kind of give you a frame of reference. One day, I was doing some computer programming for a company called Computer Land. You're probably too young to remember this company, but they disappeared long ago. But anyway, one day I walked into this computer land, and there are all these guys standing around this IBM PC, sitting on this table. And they're all kind of shaking their heads. And I walked up and I said, "What's going on?" And this guy said to me, "Oh," he said, "the guys at IBM," he said, "they're such idiots." And I said, "Well, why? What's happening?" He said, "Well, they sent us this PC and has a 10 megabyte hard drive." And I just laughed. Nobody's ever going to use that much storage. So that kind of gives you a reference of how long ago this was. But anyway, what I learned when I went to chiropractic school, and I was sitting in class one day, and our neurology instructor was kind of riffing on how the brain is a computer. Well, at the time, I was still doing programming, and I was putting myself through school partly by programming the admissions office computers. They'd come get me out of class sometimes if they had a bug, and it was great. I had a great time. And so my instructor's talking about how the brain is a computer, and I remember sitting there thinking, wow, the brain's a computer. That makes sense. I wonder if we'll ever have the technology to be able to actually hack into it or find the back door to it or ask questions somehow and get answers, because it must know what's really wrong with people. And I thought that would be an amazing way to help our patients. And I remember thinking, well, probably not in my lifetime, maybe in 200 or 300 years, maybe we'll have that technology. Little did I know that that's exactly what I was going to be spending my whole career on, is communicating with that internal computer. And so let's talk about that for a minute. We all have two minds, right? We have a conscious mind where we spend all of our waking hours, where you and I are having this interview, right? We go to school, we take our classes, we take our tests, we have our relationships, everything else. But then there's a subconscious mind. And at night when we go to sleep, the conscious mind shuts down, and what's left is the subconscious mind. And that subconscious mind, I believe, we know that it is keeping air moving in and out of our lungs, and keeping our heart beating, and all of those things. Not to mention all the trillions of chemical reactions going on every minute in our bodies. It's doing all of that. We know that it does those things. We don't know really how it does those things. And I believe that the subconscious mind is really beyond our ability to comprehend, because I think it's divine in nature, really. And so anyway, the subconscious mind remembers everything you've ever done, every face you've ever seen in a crowd, everything you've ever eaten or tasted or touched or smelled. The whole history of your health or your disease is logged in that subconscious mind. And when I was in practice, what I used to do is basically just ask questions and get answers. And I would talk to the subconscious mind and get those answers. And what I found was everybody has a subconscious mind, and those subconscious minds are very willing to give their answers. But it took me a while to figure this out, because as a computer programmer, if you think about, for example, your iPad or your phone, your computer, how do you interact? Well, there's a screen for us, right? On your phone or your laptop or your desktop computer, there's a screen where you see information and so on. You receive messages, et cetera. And then you've got a keyboard where you can type in information, right? So it's a screen/keyboard interface. Well, this subconscious mind within us is also a computer, at least. It's a computer that is kind of alien almost to us. It is a computer, but it's a far more advanced computer than any computer that is in our realm of experience. So how do we communicate with it? What's the interface? There's no screen. How do we get messages from the subconscious computer system? Well, there is no screen, but what it does, the subconscious mind will give us messages through the symptoms that we suffer, see? And so, for example, if you're having migraine headaches, there's a reason. If you're having pain in some part of the body, if you're dealing with infertility or asthma or digestive disorders or self-sabotage of some kind, or if you're dealing with some kind of a named disease, I have come to the conclusion that All of those things are symptoms, and those symptoms are messages from the subconscious that are designed to help us get to the underlying causes of those symptoms. In other words, see, in Western medicine, we look at things totally differently. I mean, in Western medicine, they look at the symptom as the problem. Oh, you've got back pain. Well, we've got a drug you can take, and you won't recognize the back pain anymore. You probably won't be able to drive either. And it might also have these harmful side effects on your liver and your kidneys. And when the drug wears off, you're going to have to take it again because all it's doing is suppressing that symptom. Meanwhile, that symptom is the subconscious mind crying out for help, right? So I began to understand all of this as I was in practice, working with people day in and day out. And so the next question is, well, if that's how the subconscious mind is showing us things and giving us messages through symptoms of all kinds, then how can we ask questions? Well, this internal computer system is binary, at least in terms of its interface. Now, what that means is you can ask any question that you want of the subconscious mind as long as the answer can be returned in the form of a yes or a no. Okay. And I didn't come up with this, but this is something that other doctors and other people had developed, and it's called muscle testing or kinesthetic testing, things like that. So, for example, if you were to hold your arm straight out parallel to the floor, and if I were to have you make a statement that's true, like if you were to say, "My name is Luke," I could press down on your arm and you'd be strong, right? If you were to say something untrue or incongruent, like if you were to say, "My name is Bob," suddenly you wouldn't be able to resist any downward pressure. Your arm would weaken. And this has been known about, for a long time. But what I found was I could use this to ask questions. And I found that I could ask any question that I wanted to, as long as the answer could be delivered back in the form of a yes or a no. And it took a while for me to figure this out. But if you think about it, I mean, it would be kind of like, imagine going to Google, and imagine if Google could only give you a yes or a no. So you'd have to phrase your questions carefully, but you would still be able to get to the information. So that's how it works. And so in my practice, that's how I worked on people after a while when I understood this. And I always had a computer there with me, and I was always, where I could record things. And as I was working on people, I would, if I found something new, I would put it into this mind map that I was building that now we call the body code. And that's what the body code really is. It's a really extensive mind map of all these imbalances that we suffer from. And so really to me, the oldest idea in the history of health and healing is that there's really only one cause of all of our symptoms and all of our problems. And that one thing is imbalances. It's really just one thing. There are different kinds of imbalances, but that's basically how that works. So, and it worked really, really well for me. When I was in practice, I found that most of the patients after a while that were seeing me were people that had been told there was really no hope for them at all in Western medicine. People that had all kinds of different chronic diseases and so on. And I found that by asking the subconscious mind what the true imbalances were that were blocking them from getting well or that were contributing to their symptoms, people could get well and did. And so that's eventually why I left practice and wrote this book, The Emotion Code, was because the biggest piece of the puzzle I found, once I learned that I could communicate with the subconscious minds of my patients, what I found was universally the number one common denominator for everybody, for all of their symptoms, was actually trapped emotions that we've been talking about. And a trapped emotion is a ball of energy. It's literally a ball of anger or resentment or whatever it might be that's stuck in the body. And these things are usually about the size of a baseball to maybe the size of a softball. And they can lodge anywhere in the body. And wherever they lodge, they will tend to create this distorting effect. Actually, let me tell you a story, if that's okay.
Please.
A a guy came into me once, many years ago, and he had this really severe back pain, low back pain. And on a 0 to 10 scale of pain, he was about a 9. So he was really in a lot of pain. It had been going on for some time. And so using muscle testing and asking questions, I found that there was a trapped emotion that was contributing to this. And the emotion was anger. And I asked if we needed to know any more about this. And his subconscious mind said yes. And sometimes that's part of the protocol for the emotion code, is sometimes we need to dig a little deeper. And so I figured out really quickly this emotion had become trapped in his body about 20 years before. And immediately he said, oh yeah, he said, I know what that's about. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. He was working at this business and he'd been falsely accused of basically stealing. And he was completely innocent. And he was furious about this because there's nothing quite like being wrongly accused of something, to make you really upset. And so he was really upset and really angry about this. And so that was it. I asked the subconscious mind if that's what had created this. The answer was yes. And so I just swiped a few times down his back with a magnet to release that energy. And all of a sudden it was completely gone. I mean, completely gone. And I've seen this happen many times, and so have our practitioners around the world. But he's bending over and twisting this way and that way and walking around and exclaiming. He was so excited, and it was kind of miraculous. And I was grateful that it worked so well. So think about this. He had this ball of energy, invisible ball of energy, apparently lodged right in his low back for all those years, 2 decades. Now, what happens is when you have a trapped emotion, it exerts kind of a distorting force on the energy field of the body. And since the body is really only made of energy, what ends up happening is that distorting force is going to interfere with things in that area, wherever that emotion's lodged. And so chemical reactions taking place in that area where that emotion is are going to be a little bit off. Maybe the blood flow, maybe the lymph flow a little bit off, right? The flow of chi energy in the meridian is going to be a little bit off in that area. So when we release that energy, all of a sudden, those tissues can breathe, right? And all of a sudden the pain is gone because that symptom doesn't need to be there anymore, right? But what was interesting about this was what happened next. A couple days later, he comes back into me for a recheck, and he said, Dr. Nelson, my back pain is still gone completely. He said, I still can't believe it. But he said, when I came in here, I had another issue going on I didn't tell you about. He said, for as long as I can remember, I've basically been what you'd call a rageaholic. He said, I'm always yelling at my wife and my kids. And he said, I'm just wired so tight. And I have to really watch out for road rage. And I've been to anger management a couple times. Hasn't really helped me. But he said, since you released that trapped emotion of anger from me, I feel so different. He said, things that used to set me off don't set me off anymore. He said, I just feel kind of peaceful. And he said, how did you do that? He said, how does that work? And at the time I said, well, I don't know. But here's what we think, okay? Think about this guy. He's got this trapped emotion, this ball of anger in his low back, right? And suddenly we release it. Well, think about this. For all of those years, when a situation would come along in his life where he might tend to feel that emotion of anger, he would feel that emotion much more easily, much more readily, because part of his body was vibrating at that frequency 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's much easier for him to fall into that resonance, body-wide. So that's really how we explain this. And if you think about the average person having probably, 200 or 300 of these, when you get to be an adult, you've been through some things. Then you start to understand how these can really deflect our paths and the lives that we really are capable of living. And they diminish our lives and our ability to create the life that we really want, that we're capable of. And so there's this whole other aspect of the emotion code. Yes, it's about physical discomfort and symptoms and so on. And every disease process that I've seen in 35 years now has had an emotional component. Every single one. And so think about this. I mean, if you're dealing with some kind of a physical symptom or an emotional symptom, or you're dealing with something where maybe you can't find your soulmate, or maybe you can't seem to break through the ceiling, maybe you can't make enough money, whatever it is, those are all symptoms to me now. It's not just the physical things. And so by removing that emotional baggage, which you can do yourself, by the way, you don't have to have someone do it for you. Although, we've certified almost 13,000 people now all over the world to do this work. So you can usually find somebody that's not too far away, but you can do this yourself. And so the Emotion Code book has the whole thing in it. Everything is in there about how to do this.
So fascinating. Makes perfect sense. I mean, if you think about emotions being energy in motion, as you described, kind of this circuitry of a peak emotional experience and those different ways in which the processing of that emotion can get stuck. I like you were kind of leaning into one part of that where you didn't use this word, but what I heard was how sometimes we feel sensations in our body, we feel this energy in motion, these emotions, and the mind has a propensity to create stories, to create meaning, to try and figure it out, right?
Sure,
Speaking of the computer. And then we find ourselves stuck in a loop of mentation, thinking that applying our attention and awareness to the figuring out is going to alleviate the discomfort of that energy and motion that we're experiencing. Or what I've found in my life that is quite common, and I've observed in other people, is that the mentation and the figuring out sometimes imbues that energy and motion with even more energy.
Right.
And then you find yourself in that think, feel, the rumination loop, which is a really, I lived first half of my life in this perpetually. It's a really uncomfortable place to be when one lacks the awareness that the mind is doing its best to help us solve the problem and get out of pain. But the process by which it attempts to do so often cements those painful emotions even deeper into our tissues and into the subconscious. It's like a glitch in the human operating system in that way.
Yeah, it really is.
Because the mind wants to figure it out, right? If you feel a way that is not pleasurable and you don't want to feel that way, our natural inclination is to go, okay, I need to really think about this and give it more and more energy.
Right.
And I remember a teacher that I had early on in my recovery from addiction, because my mind was so obsessive and so painfully obsessive in rumination and resentment and self-condemnation. I just tortured myself. And I'd be having a problem and I would want to talk about it and think about it and yada, yada. And he would just simply say, Luke, stop giving it energy.
Yeah.
That's the word he would use. And it took me years to figure out what he was talking about. I was like, no, I need to think about this thing harder because that's how I'm going to solve it. And he'd say, no, the more you think about it, the worse it's going to get.
It's true.
It's this paradoxical dilemma, that we experience. But seeing, in the model that you're working with here, how emotional energy can get stuck through these different processes of, interrupting their natural flow. It also makes sense, say, in the case of someone, being rear-ended in their car, right? You have this inertia of physical energy that, boom, is coming through the bumper of the car behind you into your bumper and reverberating these shock waves through the cavity in the frame of your car into your skeleton, into your muscular system. And that energy also has to find somewhere to go. And it reminds me of, something people have highlighted a lot when you look at an animal in the wild that experiences a stressful moment, whether it's a physical danger, injury, threat, predation, et cetera. They always shake it off. Right. You can see, that you picture, the duck that gets in a little tussle with another duck, and then, they get all pissed off and they kind of shake it off, and then they just swim happily away like nothing ever happened, And I think as humans, we haven't been taught, or we don't innately have that practice. So I want to get your take on this, something that I've just adopted in my life and taken cues from the animal kingdom, as I described, is if I experience a micro or macro trauma, whether it's, hitting my knee and getting flustered about that, and there's energy there, it needs to be moved, or have a difficult conversation with someone, or there's some tension or confrontation, I will go out in the yard in my bare feet and I will just shake my body for a few minutes and just breathe heavily and just try and get it out of my system, which sounds and looks really silly, but I'll be damned, it really helps.
Yeah. I'm sure that definitely helps.
So what's your take on, is there a difference in the way that these balls of energy, as you describe them, can get lodged and stuck in the body from an emotionally charged experience versus a physical charged experience? Or does it all kind of work the same way? Is it all able to be resolved within the model that you've created?
Well, great question. And a great setup, actually, for a story that I want to tell you.
Cool.
I had first of all, it was an answer to prayer for me, really, to go into the healing arts. And when I was 13 years old, I had kidney disease, and there was no medical treatment available for me. But my folks took me to see some old-time holistic doctors. There were some old-time osteopathic doctors, actually, that practiced out on the edge of town in Great Falls, Montana, in a trailer house out in the middle of a wheat field.
Cool. I like it already.
Yeah. And they worked on me. And I could feel in my body that this was exactly what I needed. And they were just manipulating my spine and realigning things. And within a few weeks, I was completely better. And all the tests were rerun and proved that I was completely well. And that's when I decided that I wanted to do, what they did. And in fact, I can remember lying on my back on their treatment table, looking up at them as a 13-year-old boy, saying, when I grow up, I want to do what you're doing. And they were super dismissive, super negative about it. They would say, no, you don't. They'd say, if you go to chiropractic school or naturopathic school or some school of natural healing, you'll come out of there like a zombie. Your head will be so filled with fixed ideas, you won't even be able to think for yourself. This is what they would say to me at 13. And so, these people I felt had saved my life, so I believed everything they said. So eventually going to chiropractic school was actually an answer to prayer in a literal way. So I went to school, and when I went to school, I was very on guard and very open. I was radically open, because no matter what anybody would say, no matter what my instructors would say, like, this is the best way to do this, I would always think, well, maybe it is, but maybe it's not. Maybe there is a better way. So that kept me open to all kinds of possibilities. And so I figured, it was an answer to prayer. God had gotten me into this, and so maybe God would help me. So when I got into practice, I developed this habit. And it was a totally private, totally personal habit. Nobody ever knew that I was doing this. But before I would go to work on somebody, I would just take a moment and just direct my thoughts, to the higher power and ask for help for that person, right? And sometimes these interesting things would happen in response to that. So one day, this guy comes in to see me. He's 42 years old, and he tells me that he, 4 years before, was in a car wreck. He was sitting at a stoplight, and he got rear-ended, and he got whiplash. And he said that in the ensuing 4 years, he'd seen a couple of doctors, but he said that his neck still hurt like the day after the accident. It was a 9 on a 0 to 10 scale, still. And I thought, that's kind of odd. Things should have healed up better than that after 4 years. And so before I went to work on him, I just said this silent prayer, and I said, Father, help me if there's something else going on with this, help me to understand this, because this seems kind of strange. And this answer just flooded into me. And the answer was this, that when he was rear-ended, there was all this physical energy that was released, right? That bent the frame on his car and crumpled the fenders. And that energy went through his body. But some of that energy became trapped in his neck. And I thought, and that was the answer. And that was the end of the transmission. And I thought, so some of the energy from the accident is still in his neck? That's wild. So I took a magnet and just swiped it down his back a few times with an intention to release that energy. And then I said, okay, move your neck around. Let's see how it is. And he looks left and right and tilts his head up and down. And He says, wow, that's amazing. Well, how'd you do that? And I said, well, how's it feel? He said, well, I'd say it's about a 2 now. And I said, well, when's the last time it felt that good? He said, oh, before the accident, right? So we came to call this a physical trauma energy. So it's very similar to a trapped emotional energy. It's like a little ball of energy, but it's from some kind of a physical blow that you took at some point in your life. And surgery will cause these in many cases, but it's always some physical thing that's happened. And so there's the emotional side of it and the physical side, and they'll often travel together. If something physically and emotionally jarring happened, which is often the case, right? You might find these together. And so we don't talk about the physical trauma energy and the emotion code, but it is in the body code. It's in the body code book and the app and so on. So thanks for setting that one up so well.
I love it. Well, it's just, for some viewers and listeners that skew on the woo-woo side, they're listening going, duh. But then we're going to have the more pragmatic people that think, energy, come on, you just need surgery or whatever. Maybe not many people listening to this show, but to me, all of this approach is just so intuitively aligned.
Mm-hmm.
It just, I don't know, it's the way I'm wired. It just makes perfect sense. One thing that I think is really interesting, and I've been just fascinated by this for many years, is muscle testing, kinesiology. And I think I first learned about it through David Hawkins, the teacher who would, as far as I know, was at least the first one I ever heard where, or maybe I had heard of kinesiology, or maybe even had it done. I don't know the timeline, but say on a physical level, you could take a food or a bottle of supplements, right, and hold it over your solar plexus, and you go,
right.
You stay strong or you go weak, and that's an indication that the intelligence of your body or your subconscious is saying yes or no to that thing, right? And that seems to be not as much of a stretch. But what I found so interesting and continue to find interesting about his work is he started using muscle testing for non-local phenomena, just asking a question based on any event in space or time or a concept. Is this thing true or is it not true, et cetera, right? And started using it for spiritual research, which is just an endless and fascinating rabbit hole. But what I found so interesting about his approach was if you're asking, the nervous system, is it a yes or a no? The way he framed it was, it's not yes or no, it's yes or not yes. Because in the greater realm of reality, falsehood doesn't exist. Something is just true or untrue, right? And so he would kind of frame those questions like that, which was part one that I thought was really interesting. And also that it seems to be that the nervous system response that would cause a muscle to go weak or stay strong is tapped into, I don't know, the Akashic records or a universal consciousness where all truth is known and that falsehood, in a sense, doesn't exist and is not real. Therefore, it's not a no, it's not a yes. Does that align with your experience of muscle testing?
Well, I'll tell you what, how we look at it and how we teach it is that the subconscious mind is of divine origin and is always seeking truth. It's indestructible. It's always it's basically perfect. So here we are right now. We're housed in these physical bodies, and there are divine reasons for that. And we're here to learn things and learn about making choices and consequences and so on, which we inevitably learn while we're here, for good or bad. But as far as muscle testing and getting answers and the connection and so on, what we teach is that if you can imagine a picture of an iceberg, right? And the top of the iceberg or the tip of the iceberg is a very small percentage of that iceberg. And so that part of that iceberg represents the conscious mind. The bulk of the iceberg is below the waterline, and that represents the subconscious mind and all that it knows. And it knows a lot because I personally believe we've been alive forever, not with physical bodies, but as spirit intelligences. And so that information we don't have access to. When we come into this world, our ability to access all that information is blocked somehow from us. There's a veil that is put over us in some way that we don't understand, but that interferes with our ability to access that. I was in Japan recently talking with Dr. Akira Ikagawa about the work that he's done, studying children and what they remember from before they were conceived, right?
Cool.
And also what they remember during the time they're in the womb and so on. And that's one of the things that we find in the emotion code is emotional energies that became trapped in your body before you were conceived. Now, we also can inherit those from ancestors too, but that's a different thing. But anyway, think about the picture of the iceberg, and the water that the iceberg is floating in represents this universal intelligence. The Akashic records, what Rupert Sheldrake would call the morphic field, the database of all that is, the information that connects everything and everyone. And it goes by lots of different names. But yes, I mean, that philosophically, what Dr. Hawkins talks about is philosophically valid. We don't so much make the differentiation when we're working with people, because we're just looking for a yes, or you could call it a non-yes or a no. Either way, the subconscious mind is pretty simple in the sense that probably it kind of almost knows that we're dumb and it has to dumb things down for us.
Right. That also brings to mind the difference between the physical brain and mind, right? And so we're talking about the subconscious mind, and it seems there's maybe two parts of that too. You have neural pathways, right? So you experience an emotional or a physical trauma. There's a physical record of that in the actual brain.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're wired, if you touch a hot fire, there's something in your brain that goes, oh, let's take note of this.
Oh, definitely.
And then for the rest of your life, oh yeah, I remember. You don't remember. There's something in the physical brain that remembers.
Yeah.
Right? And then there's the pathology that many of us experience where we become anxious even at the thought of fire, even though there's no danger of being burned, right?
Sure.
Say like you were mentioning one of your clients who was betrayed by her spouse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, perhaps even though that event is gone, there's something in the physical brain that's like, hey, take note of this and don't let this happen again. So be vigilant against anything that looks remotely like this. And this gets us into so many problems, right? I know in my life, it's, I've had responses that are totally inappropriate to the reality of the moment because there's something in the brain that's like wired that way. And through many experiences that I've had, not the least of which being plant medicine ceremonies and psychedelics, where I've gone into those shadowy, painful places in my past, kind of accessed the subconscious, and based on the evidence after those experiences, have removed those emotional triggers. And I think some of what has happened is through an act of grace and divinity that the physical brain has been kind of mended and rewired so that those inappropriate responses are no longer present. So that is to say, it seems there's something happening in the physical brain.
Yeah.
But then there's something happening in the subconscious.
Yes.
And as you described, the water around the bottom of the iceberg being consciousness itself at large, it's almost as if maybe there's a super consciousness that is our subconscious. And maybe in muscle testing and things like that we're tapping into that broader sense of consciousness. It's not just the subconscious. There's something even above and beyond that we're connected to, but that we lose touch with in a tangible way. Would you say that the emotion code and the body code and some of this work is working in part with the physical aspect of the brain, the localized subconscious, and then even the superconscious all at once?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, the interface between the physical brain and the subconscious mind and the deep mind, whatever you want to call it, we don't understand how it all interfaces. We know that it works, right? But we don't really get it. We don't really know how it works. I mean, there's so much about the human body still that's not understood. For example, they've done studies with people who have multiple personalities, and they found that a person in one personality might have full-blown diabetes type 1, no islet cells in the pancreas at all. But when they shift into another personality, all of a sudden, everything changes, and that goes completely away.
That's insane. Right? No pun intended.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
And so, you think about it, and we're used to these physical bodies, but really, if you talk to a quantum physicist, they'll tell you, well, the body really is more like a projection than anything else. Because, if you look at your hand looks pretty solid, but if you get a big enough microscope and you zoom in past the cells and past the molecules and down to the level of the atom, you see, well, you look inside the atom, there's nothing in there. It's just empty space, and infinitesimally tiny energy zipping around at the speed of light, and the next atom's long distance away. They say that if you could remove all the empty space from everybody's body on Earth, you could fit all the people in the world, 7.8 billion people, into a box the size of a sugar cube. So where we are right now is it's like we're just kind of emerging from this cocoon of the industrial model, right? That started with the Industrial Revolution and looking at the body as a machine and different parts. And we're struggling to try to come into this new understanding that comes with quantum physics, where everything is understood to be energy, and energy itself is intelligent. And how does that work, right? At least I believe that energy is intelligent. I think that's how all the great miracles have always been done. When Jesus changed the water to wine, I believe that happened. How did he do that? Well, I think he just talked to the water and told it to reorganize, and it did, because it's intelligent.
Right.
And we know that scientists have done studies. They know that these subatomic particles will change their behavior depending on what the observer is expecting to see that they haven't mentioned to anyone. How does that work? How are our thousands of practitioners around the world able to connect with other people on the other side of the planet and get instantaneous results with them on a routine basis? How's that happening? Well, it's the nature of the world that we live in. And coming back to what we were talking about as far as the conscious mind, the way that I explain it, the simplest way, and I love simplicity. And if I can find a simple, answer to something, I'm good with it. My own belief is that we've always existed as spirits, as, if you go far enough back, probably just as pure intelligence. And then I believe that somewhere in the distant past, the Creator connected our pure intelligence with matter in some way and formed bodies, spirit bodies for us. And that's the body that people see when someone dies. And they see that sometimes because, there are records of this since time out of mind, where people have not only left their body and been able to see their body on the ground or, in the car wreck or whatever, but people sometimes also see other people's bodies, spirits leaving their bodies. There was a story back in I think it was in the late 70s. There was a guy that was involved in a plane crash. And he found himself, when he regained consciousness, he was outside the airplane in the weeds, and he saw the body of the plane, it was on fire. So he went back over to see if he could help. And as he looks into the fuselage, he can see that people are still strapped into their seats, and it's like a furnace, and there's nothing he can do. But as he sees people dying one by one, he sees these spirits come right out of the top of their head. It's them, it's their essence, their spirit, who they really are. He sees these spirits coming out of them, and he sees that they're no longer in pain, they're at peace, and they all go out of the top of their heads and out through the fuselage, and they're gone. But what he notices is that some of these spirits leaving these bodies are really bright to look at, and others are kind of shades of gray, and one or two are kind of dark. And it came to him that was about who they were and the kind of choices that they had made in this world. And so he made a resolution to himself that he was going to tell people about this, and that when he died, he was going to try to have as bright of a spirit as he could, by choosing unconditional love and, and making good choices and things. And so he was on one of those shows. I remember many, many years ago, Merv Griffin, I think it was, or something, is where I probably saw this. But isn't that interesting? So there's this whole aspect of our nature, right? And I had an experience one day that I'll share with you. My own belief is that before we come into this world, we live with the Creator in this place of total unconditional love and acceptance and perfection and beauty and everything else. And then we come into this world, and of course, our memories from before are blocked off to us, and so all we know is this world, and we're here. And
I call that karmic amnesia.
Yeah, karmic, same thing.
It would be too much to hold. We can't even handle the one lifetime, right? From the time of your earliest memories when you're 3 or 4 until I'm 54 now. It's like, this is enough. I don't. Like, a lot of people are into past life regression and stuff, and I'm sure it has its value, and maybe I'll do it someday. But I'm like, I'm just trying to handle this incarnation.
Yeah. Well, so what happened?
It makes sense that we would be gifted with that amnesia each time we come back into a new body, right? Because it's too much to contextualize all of that with one brain and one experience, and it seems like it could interfere with the mission that we've chosen or that we've been given here in this incarnation.
Totally. Yeah, I think it totally would. Well, in fact, I had this experience one day. I was 18 years old, and I was sitting meditating one day, and all of a sudden that partition that divides us from our memories of where we were, all of a sudden it was like that lifted just for a few seconds. And it wasn't that I could remember anything specific, and it wasn't that I could see anything or visualize anything, but the result was absolutely just overwhelming, because the moment that block was lifted, every particle of my being was just instantaneously filled with the most overwhelming feeling of homesickness to be back where I came from, where we all came from. And that window opened and then it closed, and it just left me reeling. And I realized how important that is, that we have to have that, because otherwise, if we didn't have that, I believe we would not be able to stand it in this world for 5 minutes.
Like if we had the perception that our life was finite, that if that's all there was,
if we could remember the place where we came from, if we had that memory here, we wouldn't be able to stand it here.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it also taught me that we really are, in a sense, we're really strangers here. We're just kind of passing through. So
that something you said earlier about children, remembering their past lives. This to me is really interesting. We've been on a journey of wanting to have a kid for a while now, and it's like one of the things that I'm most looking forward to is just quizzing them when they're very young, going, "Who are you?"
Yeah.
And I've even had that idea. I couldn't get my wife on board. Let's not name our kid even. Just wait till they can talk and be like, "What's your name? What do you like to be called?" Because we know you've been here before, right? But I saw a video a few months ago on social media, and it was, I don't know, I'm gonna say a young kid was maybe 3 or 4, and was sitting there playing piano. And just banging on the piano. And it wasn't like a classical piece, but it wasn't out of tune. Yeah. I mean, it was music. It wasn't noise.
Yeah.
And the kid just sitting there, ding, 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 ding. And I'm like, I'm a musician. I play a little piano. I could never sit down and play as well as that kid was playing. And I saw that and I was just like, there is no goddamn way that that's just like a gift that this kid just was bestowed in this lifetime. Like there has to be a past life breaking through the veil there. It's just, there's no way. There's no other way to explain it.
Well, I think we've been alive. I think we've been alive forever. And I think that, one of the fascinating things is that when people die, there are lots of stories about how when they die, these are people that come back and tell the tale, but when they were dead, that they would see other spirits around. And, sometimes they would, years later, recognize one of those spirits as, oh my gosh, that's our son now that just turned 20. I recognize him. He was there, 30 years ago when I died and came back. Or they'd say, I've read things like, well, yeah, I was going through this old book of genealogy and I recognized that guy's my great-great-grandfather. He was there. He's one of the spirits that was there when I had my near-death experience. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
That's wild.
So, my own belief is that we've all been here before, as at least, and I'm still, I'm not certain about past lives ourselves, but I think we've all been here at least once, probably many times, in the form of angels, essentially, like spirits, helping to shepherd other people through their mortal life. Because angels are all around us. And in fact, one of our practitioners, a woman named Connie, who was my assistant for quite a while, she's one of our staff practitioners now, and she told us this story where a friend of hers is one of those people that was gifted with that ability to see spirits that other people don't see, right? And even since they were young girls. And one day, her friend came out to visit Connie, and they were talking, and Connie said, well, listen, I have some sessions to do. I've got some people to work on remotely. And so why don't you just sit here and read a book or something? I'll see you in a while. And her friend said, well, if it's okay with you, I'd like to just sit in the corner and be a fly on the wall and see what you're doing. So Connie said, okay, fine. So she does her sessions. She has a moment of silence before each session where she's asking for help, from up above. And which is kind of what I taught her to do, right? And at the end of this, she gets done, closes her laptop, and her friend says, Connie, she said, I don't think you are aware of what's going on totally. She said, when you went to work on that first person and you had that moment of silence, you were asking for help. She said, I saw beings come in and stand behind you. And they were intently focused on helping you to ask the right questions and find out what was going on and help that person on the other end. And she said they had some interest in that person. They were family members or ancestors or whatever. She said, when you were done with that person, they disappeared. When you had your moment of silence for the next person, a whole different group came in.
Wow.
And happened every time. She said,
Wow.
sometimes it was just a couple people, sometimes it was 4 or 5, but it happened every single time. So this is one of the things that we teach our practitioners to do is ask for help, because it's when you ask for that help, that's when those spirits come in to help. So there's a whole unseen world, going on around us all the time that we're just blissfully unaware of, most of us, right, as we go through life. But that nevertheless is very real, just as real as the life that we're living. It's just that it's in a slightly different dimension.
Yeah. I've had similar experiences. You brought to mind, I have a book over there on the shelf I think it's called The Big Book of Near-Death Experiences. There's just all these anecdotal stories of people who have had that experience. And some of them that are the most interesting to me is where a person leaves their body, say they're having a procedure done and they're on the operating table, and the medical staff starts to panic and their heartbeat stops and they quote, die. And then they're floating up in the corner of the room watching the whole circus of the attending staff trying to revive them. They come back into their body and are resuscitated, and then they are able to describe what everyone in the room was saying and doing while they were dead.
I love those.
That's one of the coolest, right? Because then it's corroborated by the people who are still there and totally alive. And I think those stories would help any skeptic to, gain an awareness that there's much more going on than meets the eye.
Yeah, I love those stories.
Yeah.
We have a family friend who has had that ability to see spirits, and it's so entertaining to listen to her talk about how, for example, going to a funeral where she'll be sitting there and all of a sudden she'll see the deceased person with his entourage all walk in and sit down and things like that.
Wow.
Yeah. In fact, let me share a story with you. It's really interesting. I mean, it's all pretty far out.
I love it. I mean,
some people, but
you've been on a zillion podcasts where people can get into more of the nuts and bolts. And there are some other things I want to cover about your model. But I find this stuff to be so fun to talk about.
Well, one of our practitioners told us that she was working on herself one day. And you can do that with the emotion code. You can work on yourself. And she found that she had an inherited trapped emotion. Now, inherited trapped emotions are received at the moment of conception, we believe, from an ancestor, from mom or dad, and they might have gotten them when they were conceived from their mom or dad, and these can go back for generations, right? And she found this, she had this inherited trapped emotion of shame. And she was muscle testing herself to figure out where this came from and found that she'd gotten it from her mother, who'd gotten it from her mother, who'd gotten it from her mother. So she'd gotten it from, I believe it was her great-great-grandmother, or her great-grandmother. And all of a sudden, this woman appears in her room to her, and it was her great-grandmother. And she tells her that, after she overcame her shock, I guess, at seeing this woman just kind of materialize, she tells her that the shame was from her life because as a child, she was sexually abused, and for many years. And things being what they were back then, she never told a soul and lived her whole entire life with that secret, and then died an old woman and took the secret to the grave with her. And then all these years later, here's this great-granddaughter that is working on her, and she made her presence known to explain what this was about. And then the two of them wept together. I mean, think about that. There are lots of interesting stories, in this realm of energy medicine. I'll tell you something. One of the most powerful experiences that I had of healing myself was actually about an inherited trapped emotion, where one day, a couple of years after the Emotion Code book came out, I asked my daughter Natalie to work on me. And she was in Seattle, and I was in southwestern Utah where I live. And so I hung up the phone. She said she'd work on me right then. And so she starts working on me remotely, which we teach how to do in the book. And she finds right away that I have this inherited trapped emotion of hopelessness. And she starts to feel emotional about it. Well, I had passed it to her when she was conceived, but I had gotten it, she finds, from my father. And he gotten it from his mother, who got it from his mother, and who got it from, my dad got it from his mom, and then it stayed in the mother's line, and it went back 22 generations. It was like 1400s. And when my daughter arrived at the point of origin of this thing, just through muscle testing, all of a sudden, she can feel that there's someone standing next to her, and she knows who it is. It's the woman that this started with. And she can feel her emotions. She can feel how desperate she is to have this emotional energy released from her posterity. That's what she had passed down the line. She could also feel how overwhelmed with gratitude she was that this was being done. So my daughter, working on me remotely, released that emotion, and she could feel it released from that woman, and she was gone, and felt it ripple through all those ancestors. But to me, the amazing thing was what happened in my life from that. I knew my daughter was working on me, and all of a sudden I had this experience. Imagine that you grow up. You're born and you grow your whole life next to a factory right by your house. And this factory runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there's this hum coming out of the factory day and night. After a while, you wouldn't even notice it anymore. But if all of a sudden, when you're 50 years old, the factory goes out of business and shuts down, and you've been living there your whole life, wow, the silence is going to be deafening from that, right? That's exactly what this was like. It was like all of a sudden, this background, low-level feeling of hopelessness that had been in the back of my mind every waking moment of my entire life was suddenly gone. And I never even knew that it was there until that moment when it disappeared. And I suddenly just realized that had been there the whole entire time in my life. And that's one of the most powerful things that ever happened to me. My daughter, too, is one of the most amazing, one of the most gifted artists that I've ever seen. I mean, the things that she can do, just incredible, incredibly gifted. She's studying to become an architect now. But she never really painted anything until that hopelessness energy was removed. A year later, she had an art showing in Seattle, and all this art is just pouring out of her. I think if that had not been removed or released, I'd still be battling with that background feeling. In fact, when I was writing the Emotion Code book, Luke, every time I would go to write, I'd have to spend at least half an hour or an hour just listening to really positive, motivational audios and things to try to overcome this feeling of hopelessness. And if anybody during the time I was writing that book would have asked me to describe in one word how the project felt, without any hesitation whatsoever, I would have said, well, it feels hopeless.
Wow.
But I'm continuing.
Wow.
And that was from that energy that's, was, I don't know, 500-600 years old, that was passed down the line. See, so if you think about this, these emotional energies are not only from our own lifetime, they can be from prior to conception at some point. They can be from our family line. And, scientists, they're looking at how this works. They know that there's this inheritance that goes on with traumatic memories with animals. The first study that I know of that was done on this was, I believe it was in Atlanta. What they did is they took mice, and they would subject these mice to a mild electrical shock at the same time that they were blowing in the scent of cherry blossom into their cages. And after doing that a few times, they'd be sensitized to cherry blossom scent, so that if they smelled it, they'd have a fear reaction. Well, then they found that their offspring would have the same reaction, even if they had never smelled cherry blossom, right? For generations down the line, they'd all react. So what they did is they took sperm from these sensitized mice and took them across to the other side of the campus and impregnated female mice that had never been shocked and had never smelled cherry blossom scent. Their offspring were sensitized. Yes. So that was the beginning of this mind-blowing concept that there's this, and somehow this inheritance goes on. And of course, scientists are looking at the DNA under a microscope, trying to figure out, well, how is this done? Well, it's a quantum phenomenon, you see. It's an energy phenomenon, and it's emotional baggage. And one of the studies that we want to do is we want to replicate that study, and then we want to work on half the mice and remove the emotional energy that's trapped from being shocked and smelling cherry blossom, and then seeing what those offspring do. And we're quite certain that they will no longer be sensitized, you see.
Ooh, I want to see that.
Yeah. So that's the next study that
we
want to do.
That's very cool. You just brought to mind something talking about writing your book, which I relate to some of the challenges in doing that. I'm writing my first book at the moment, and the theme of the book is loneliness, existential loneliness, because I think if we could find solutions for that, that's the pathway to unity, right? And because as we've been talking about, we live in a world of perceived separation, right? There's a me and there's a you.
Right.
And so how can we create intimacy when I don't know that I am actually you, and so on, right?
Yeah.
And so we have this adversary relationship with other people and other experiences in the world, when at the core, there is no duality. It's all consciousness. It's all God. It's all one thing. And we can get that as a concept, yet so many of us still live with a sense of perceived separation, and it can be really painful. And so that's kind of what I'm writing about in many different ways.
Well, I can't wait to read that.
Thanks, man. I'm excited. Yeah, it's a daunting yet exciting, project. But that brings me to, looking at different emotions in isolation, or just a general felt sense that many of us carry. And I find it really interesting that the emotion of loneliness has been correlated specifically to heart attacks and stroke. And I've known that for a while, just kind of researching, this symptom that we carry, so many of us, and thinking about how that relates to the emotion code. Have you found any correlations between that specific experience of loneliness and the body? Where does it show up? Would you say that it is showing up as a heartache that can then manifest as a detectable physical malady?
Well, I'll tell you what's really interesting is the connection between the brain and the heart. And back in the earlier days when I was working with people, sometimes I would release a person's emotional baggage, and I would just have this nagging feeling that there was something missing. I was missing something. I didn't know what it was. And then one day, my wife woke me up early one morning and told me that she'd had this dream. And there were symbols, 3 symbols in her dream, and they had to do with her health and well-being. She knew that, but she didn't know what it meant. And so she asked me if I would help her to figure out what these symbols meant. So we figured out the first 2 symbols from her dream. They were a couple of inherited trapped emotions we hadn't found before. And when I turned my attention to the 3rd symbol from her dream, all of a sudden, I have what I can only describe as a waking vision, where the room that I'm in is no longer there, and I'm looking at this unbelievably beautiful hardwood floor. And at the same time that I'm seeing this, and this lasted for several minutes, this waking vision. I've never had anything like this happen since. But at the same time that I'm seeing this floor, and this is definitely high def, beyond 4K resolution. In fact, it was so beautiful. If I think about it for very long, it'll bring me to tears, because it was just, never seen a photo, never seen a floor in real life like this. But at the same time that I'm seeing this, I have this understanding that comes into my mind that my wife's heart is underneath this floor. I have no idea what this means. Her heart is under this floor. So I know that this is coming from her subconscious mind. So I decided, okay, let me ask some questions and see if we can figure out what this is. Because I told her what I was seeing and understanding. She didn't have any idea either what this meant. Well, long story short, what we found was when she was 2 years old, her subconscious mind had started to build a wall around her heart. And that wall was made of layers of emotional baggage. And that wall had gotten bigger and had been built up with multiple layers of emotions. It's made of trapped emotions, trapped emotional energy, emotional baggage. And the price that she paid for having this wall was that it was easy for her to feel negative emotions, hard to feel positive emotions. She battled with depression and anxiety. And she also never really felt like she belonged anywhere. I mean, even with girlfriends of hers that she'd known all of her life, she never really felt like she belonged. So we asked if we could remove these. And so we were able to start removing them one at a time. And it took us a couple of weeks. When the last one was gone, all of a sudden, things shifted for her in this huge way. And so talking about the heart, back in the 1960s, when doctors first started doing heart transplants, it didn't take long before they noticed that sometimes people would come back and report strange things, like their taste in music or food or sports had totally changed, or they'd have memories of being in places that they had never in their life ever been. Well, the ancients believed the heart to be the seat of the soul and the source of love and creativity and romance and the core of our being. Well, now we know that about 93% of people have put up this wall around the heart. We know that most of the communications between the brain and the heart are flowing from the heart to the brain. And so if you think about it, loneliness is kind of almost like another form of heartache, right? I mean, if you're really feeling really deeply lonely, you're going to feel it here. And when you're feeling those feelings, those physical feelings, your heart is really under assault. And so if that happens more than once or twice, the subconscious will put up a wall. And so the vast majority of people have put up this wall. And when the wall is taken down, so in other words, if you think about the world, the vast majority of people are walking around with a wall around their heart. And so they're living mainly from this brain, which first of all, doesn't really feel anything. This is where we feel, right? Whether it's good or bad. I mean, if you see people, if you're at a concert, for example, and there's someone singing or playing beyond their own ability, everyone's going to be like this, right? They'll have tears in their eyes. wow, this is just unbelievable. You feel it here. If someone's really hurting you, you also feel it here, right? And so this is the more important, really, I think, of the two brains. But it doesn't surprise me that that loneliness is connected, with strokes or heart attack, because those are the two brains. And so it's really amazing, because when the heart wall is what we call this, the heart wall, and all the instructions for this are in the book, of course. But when that wall is taken down, it's not unusual at all for people to fall in love who never thought they would. For people to have creative ideas that start to flow spontaneously, And so it's fun stuff. One of my favorite heart wall stories is from one of our practitioners who got a phone call from her sister who'd been divorced for 9 years. And she said, listen, sis, I want you to come over and work on me, see if I have a heart wall, because I'm tired of being alone. I need to find somebody. I don't want to die by myself. So the two of them got together, spent the weekend together. And sure enough, sister had a heart wall, and her practitioner sister was able to clear it. And neither one of them told anybody that they were doing this. But on Monday, the phone started to ring. Who was calling? Guys that had known her before. And when that wall was taken down, all of a sudden, that energy of hers was going out into the world, into the universe. And those guys that were attuned to that frequency perked up and picked up the phone.
That's so cool.
That fun?
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, heart wall. I really like that that framing. That makes a lot of sense. It's one of the human tragedies, I think, that so many of us go through our lives with that heart wall intact and have no idea that that's what's separating us. It's like the thing that's trying to protect us from being hurt is the thing that's hurting us.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly another one of those paradoxes about our reality.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, people often talk about in these circles about becoming an ascended being, and, and how do you become an ascended being? And it's clear to me that that's all about unconditional love. Who we are when we leave this world, we take nothing with us, but we do take our ability to love others unconditionally. And the knowledge that we've gained, that's all we take.
Don't get to take your plane.
Can't even take that with me, no. I'd like to.
The older I get, and hopefully a little more wise along the way, it's becoming more and more abundantly clear to me that the whole purpose of this game of being in a human meat suit is to learn how to love universally. Not to love in a romantic sense, but to love the entire fabric of reality and everything that it includes, right? To love the experience of pain, to love the experience of suffering, to love that we're in a world with such high contrast. Otherwise it's too much to bear. If you can't find, at least for me, if I can't find a purpose in the suffering that I experience or that I see in the world, it's like, why am I even here? It becomes futile. It becomes hopeless. Going back to your sense of hopelessness, it's like, well, why even bother? But if the benchmark is unconditional love of myself and all that reality includes, you're never going to win the game or finish the game. So that gives you something to work with. In a sense, it's like there's always something to strive for. Yeah. And gives you the humility to know you'll probably never achieve it completely while you're here. But it makes the game more fun, and it also alleviates so much of the suffering along the way, right? Because the solution to suffering in my life is always about how far I've drifted from love. Anytime I'm feeling any kind of pain, I've just forgotten my purpose. And I've gotten lost in the illusion that there's something other than love here.
Yeah, it's really simple when you get down to it. And it's so interesting because, a lot of these near-death experiences, when they talk about having a life review, they're never asked, how fancy of a house did you live in? Or, did you become a bazillionaire? It's never about any of that. It's always about, well, how much love were you able to develop? What's your capacity to love others? And how much knowledge did you gain? And it's interesting because it makes me think of Paul wrote to the Corinthians, and he, in the New Testament, he said, if I have all knowledge and I can do all kinds of miracles, and if I have enough faith to move mountains, if I don't have that pure love, which he called charity. If I don't have that ability to love others unconditionally, then it's all for nothing. It's all just pointless. And love is really the ultimate, it's the ultimate, I hesitate to use the word weapon, but it's like, it's the ultimate thing that solves, it answers all the problems and answers all the issues. And it is absolutely what we need to strive for. It has all the answers for us. So
let's get into some of the more pragmatic elements of the emotion code and the body code. So we've got the muscle testing, and the practitioners like Frank that I've worked with will do the finger muscle testing on themselves as they ask questions. They'll go back, okay, was it at this age or that age? Was it this feeling? Was it shock? Was it whatever?
Yeah.
And then they'll get a strong or a weak on their own muscle, and that's how they kind of move forward into the process. So that's my limited understanding and experience of it. Could you explain kind of what happens in a session, and then how it? Well, you've talked about how it can work. Well, does work remotely, but the difference between maybe someone working with a practitioner, in a clinical setting versus doing something remotely online. And if the magnets are a necessary part of that, and if so, how those work as well.
Okay, sure. Well, let's say, for example, we're going to work on you right now. Being here together live and in person, what I would probably have you do is hold your arm out. And we would start by just having you make a true and a false statement. Like, you might say, my name is Luke. I'd press down on your outstretched arm, and you should be able to be strong to resist that. If you said, my name is Bob, your arm would weaken. And that would indicate to me that, well, first of all, what it feels like to get a yes and a no answer from your body, and that you're testable. Most people are testable most of the time, sometimes untestable for short periods. And so then what we would do is we would ask, first of all, if you had any kind of issue that you're working with or dealing with. Physical, mental, emotional issue. I might ask you, if you have an issue. And if you do, let's say that you were dealing with neck pain. So I would ask at that point, if we're doing the emotion code, I would find the chart. There's a chart of emotions in the book. And looking at that chart, I would probably ask, do you have a trapped emotion that's contributing to your neck pain? And then I would muscle test for either a yes or a no answer out of your subconscious mind. And if we get a yes answer, then looking at the emotion code chart, which is divided up into 2 columns and 6 rows, there are 60 emotions on the chart. I would ask if the emotion is in column A. Now, you don't need to be looking at the chart while we're doing this, okay? Because again, your subconscious is connected to the database of all that is, and the chart exists out in that database as well as right here. And so what I would do is I would ask is the emotion in column A? And if the answer is no, then we assume it's in column B. And then we would ask, is it in one of the odd rows in column B or an even row in column B? And we would narrow it down that way to the row. And then we'd end up with 5 emotions in that row. And then we would ask, all right, well, let's say we end up in column B, row 6, the only one I have memorized. I would ask, okay, is it pride, shame, shock, unworthy, or worthless? And each time we would muscle test. And one of those should be strong. If they're all weak, that's how we would find out if, that's usually how the subconscious will guide us to an inherited trapped emotion. It'll take you to the column in the row, and that's as far as you can go until you actually use the word inherited. Then it will take you there. And then what we would do, once we've identified the emotion, let's say that the emotion is pride, or let's try pride. It was pride, shame, shock, unworthy. Maybe it's worthless. Maybe you went through something at some point in your life where you felt really worthless, which is just feeling like you have no value. What we would do is we would ask the subconscious one more question, and that is, do we need to know more about this? And what we're doing there is we're giving the subconscious mind a chance to, for us to dig deeper. See, what we're trying to do is close the loop on that emotional experience, right? And sometimes there's information attached to that experience, to that loop, that needs to be brought to conscious awareness before the loop can be closed. And so maybe your subconscious mind says, yeah, we need to know more. So then we'd ask, well, let's say that you're 40 years old. We would ask, did this occur earlier than 20, dividing your life in half? Maybe that's a no. Maybe it occurred between 20 and 30. And maybe we arrive at age 28. And then And then, there's a couple possibilities there. You might say, oh, okay, yeah, that was a real low point in my life, or I went through this or that, or I lost my dad, or, that happens. Or sometimes people will say, well, it doesn't really ring a bell. Sometimes that happens. And sometimes as I'll be working on the person, all of a sudden they'll remember. Or sometimes they might remember a couple days later. So you never know. But that's basically how the process works. Then when we're ready to release the emotion and we get a no answer to that question, do we need to know more? Then we just take a magnet or a hand, either way, your hand, and we just swipe down the middle of the back. If you're working on yourself, you can go from your forehead over the top of your head to the back of your neck a few times. We do 10 swipes if it's inherited, because we're clearing it not only from you, but also from all those ancestors. And 3 swipes if it's just a regular trapped emotion.
So I have one of these magnets that I showed you earlier, and you said it's a cow magnet.
It's a cow magnet,
which I want to hear about. But sometimes, it's in my desk drawer, the one that I access a lot. And sometimes if I'm just feeling a little off or feeling some anxiety, I'll just take this and I'll just run it over my head. Just because that's what Frank did in one of our sessions. Is that doing anything if I don't do any of the process and of the inquiry that's involved in the whole modality?
I think if you're in the middle of feeling an intense emotion, that's an energy frequency in your body that you're feeling. And so swiping a few times like that, I think can help you to probably become more present and deal with that energy so that it's less likely to become trapped in the body. Just swiping without having to go through the process to bring that the trapped emotional energy from your past or your ancestors or whatever, it's not going to really do anything for those, because you do need to bring these to the surface in a sense through the process.
Right. So you're not having the intentionality and the attention specifically directed toward that goal. So it's just kind of a overarching, rebalancing maybe or something like that without the specifics needed to really clear something.
Right. But it's possible that you might get lucky and be able to release something.
Okay.
One of the things, for example, we talked about the physical trauma energy. And one of the things that we sometimes have people do is, if you were in some kind of a car wreck, for example, or you had some major surgery or something happened to you that was physically traumatic, you can try thinking about that and thinking about releasing that energy and then just swiping a few times on yourself, with a magnet, or you can use your hand. And all of a sudden you may notice, gee, my back pain that I've had for 30 years is gone. That kind of thing happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Or I could go out in the yard and do my animal shake and run the magnet a few times. I know this is totally off topic, but tell us about why and how this is a cow magnet. I think that's so interesting.
Well, I think that's a cow magnet. What they do with cows is, I grew up in Montana, so this is something that I know.
It's funny, the gentleman I interviewed yesterday was from Montana, George Weisman, outside of Bozeman. It's Montana week here on the show.
It's Montana week. Well, what they do with cows is they'll feed them these fairly, substantial, really powerful magnets. And they go down into I think they have 8 stomachs, and the magnet will just sit in there so that if the cow eats something metallic as it's out grazing, those metallic things will just attach to the magnet and they won't go through the rest of the cow's system and damage them.
Wild. I love that.
It is
I love funny little bits of information like that. All right. Another thing that is really compelling about the work you do is that, as I understand it, and you can elaborate on this, is that it can also be applied to animals. So people might have livestock or pets that, shocker, hello, they have the same nervous system, some sort of version of a subconscious mind that we have. What are some experiences people have had with animals?
Oh, gosh. Well, one of our practitioners lives in France, at least was living in France last time we spoke with her, and has a remote practice where she works on racehorses, thoroughbred racehorses around the world, releasing trapped emotions from them, and does very well. I've had some experiences myself, some really interesting experiences. And there, probably most of those are in the Emotion Code book. But it's fascinating that animals definitely have trapped emotions. I'll share one story with you, maybe. I think my favorite story. I was called to work on a horse one day that had a problem with its hindquarters. It wasn't walking right. There was something wrong with it. And the veterinarian had come out and taken a look at it, but there wasn't anything obvious going on. So they called me up for kind of a second opinion. I was the last person in line usually. And so they called me up and I went out to look at this horse. And as I'm looking at this horse and basically what you do when you're working on an animal like a horse, what I would do back then is I would have one person put a hand on the horse and then hold their arm outstretched in front of them, their other arm. And I would ask questions of the horse. I would talk to the horse and then get the answers by muscle testing the human.
Oh, cool. So the human would act as a conduit for...
Yes,
okay.
Exactly right. So strong for yes, weak for no. And so I'd start by asking the horse, its name. Is your name Ranger, for example? And I'd get a yes, right? And then I'd ask, well, okay, let's see here. Do you have a trapped emotion that's contributing to this problem with your hindquarters? Yes, strong. Okay. Oh, is it a trapped emotion about a human? No. Actually, I figured out what the emotion was by using the chart on this particular horse this day. The emotion was sorrow. And so I said, okay, is it sorrow about a human? No. Okay, another horse? No. Dog? No. Cat? No. I'm kind of running out of ideas. And this bird flies overhead. So I thought, well, was it sadness about a bird? And the answer was rock solid, yes. And I actually started laughing. And there was a little crowd of people gathered around, which was not uncommon. And they all started laughing as well. Because I thought that's really silly that a horse would have sorrow about a bird. But the horse's owner was there. She said, wait a minute. She said, I think I know what this is about. She said, the prior week, right in front of the horse's stall, a baby bird fell out of its nest onto the little roadway, this little paved pathway, and struggled for its life for a time and then eventually died right in front of her horse's stall. And so I asked the horse, is that what this is about? Yes, rock solid, right? And so the horse was powerless and just was a mute witness to this whole little tragedy that played out. This baby bird that was never gonna know the joy of flight and never have its own baby birds, and its life was over before it had even really begun. The horse was filled with this emotion of sorrow about this, and that sorrow emotion became trapped in the horse's body because it was so powerful. So I took a magnet and started at the horse's ears and just went down to its tail a few times, and then they took the horse out and walked it, and it was completely, perfectly fine.
What?
Yeah.
That's crazy. I love that. That's so beautiful because I think, in our arrogance as human beings, because we do have, obviously more advanced cognition than other animals. Although that's debatable if you look at politics.
That is debatable.
I'm going to take that statement back. So we think we have, but I think sometimes, because we don't have the experience of being an animal, right, that we sort of discount their emotional intelligence and how they experience pain and how they experience feelings and all of that. It reminds me, again, I always talk about David Hawkins because I'm just such a fan of his work, but he would tell a story in his lectures. And I always sensed that he was speaking about himself, although he never admitted so. He would tell a story about a hunter who was a lifelong a bird hunter, duck hunter. And one day this hunter was out shooting ducks with a shotgun and shot a duck out of the air, and the duck fell, and then its mate swam up and ran on shore and covered and tried to protect the dead duck. And he just started weeping in the moment, and he never hunted again for the rest of his life, And he said, he told it like a true story, but he wasn't like, oh, my friend Joe, this happened to him. So I always intuited that he was speaking subjectively, although I don't know that's true. But that story always stuck with me. It's like, oh, wow, yeah, we aren't the only ones that have that pair bonding instinct, or the only ones for whom we experience love for other creatures and things like that. And anyone that owns a dog or a cat or a domestic animal, your dog loves you. I mean, when we come in the house, our dog freaks out for 20 minutes, and it's so fun to share that experience with her. And then sometimes I'll even observe, our dog more so than our cat because they're not as obviously emotive. But I can tell when our dog is just sad. She's just in a mood. I don't know why. So we'll try to comfort her, but you can just tell she's kind of bummed out, for whatever reason. It's usually temporary, right? You throw the toy or get out a treat or take her for a walk and, it all changes much easier than it does for us. But I find the emotionality of animals so interesting. And I think they deserve a lot more credit for their capacity for emotion than we give them on the surface.
I totally agree. Well, I think that it's part of the consciousness that is expanding in this world. I don't think that a day goes by where the the consciousness level of the world is not a little bigger than it was the day before. And I don't think it's ever going to go back to where it was. But I mean, think about it. Think of all the animals that have just been treated as machines, for example. Think of all the abuse that's happened. Some of the most moving experiences that I've had in my life have actually been working with animals. I remember I got a call once to work on a horse that, the owners didn't know what to do. They had paid $100,000 for this quarter horse. Perfect bloodlines. And they had sent it off for training. It was going to be competing, as a quarter horse, doing barrel racing and so on. And when they got it back from the training, it was like the horse hated people, and nobody could work with the horse, and they just didn't know what they were going to do. They were out $100,000, and so I got a call to go work on this horse, and this was after I was out of practice. It wasn't even something that that I was doing officially, but somehow somebody found out about some of the work that I'd done. So I go to work on this horse, and this horse apparently had been abused when it was sent off, which is unfortunately not uncommon. And as part of its training, some people think that to train a horse, you beat it, and I guess. And so anyway, the energy of the emotions that were coming out of this horse as I was releasing these emotions were so powerful that, I just wept the whole time I'm working on this horse. It was just, and that horse 2 weeks later won its first ribbon, started winning races, boom, right out of the gate. Because as soon as that was done, see, it's not uncommon at all. Animals will have physical problems or behavioral problems or both. And it's usually emotional baggage. That's why I wrote this book, The Emotion Code, first, when I got out of practice, was because 80% of the problems that we have, and that animals have too, are due to our emotional baggage. And it can be so simple to get rid of that baggage. And there's a whole chapter in the book on animals, and the new book that's a hardcover, there's even more animal stories. And because when I wrote the book the first time, the only stories that I really had were my own. But it's so much fun to work on animals because there's no placebo effect, right? They're just pure love. They just, especially animals like dogs, like you said, they just want to love us. With horses, it's really interesting because it's more like a soap opera with horses, because there are all these relationships going on with all the other horses, and I want to be that horse, and I don't like that horse, and just really interesting stuff.
Yeah. Well, I have an idea if you'd be open to it, and no pressure. And we've never attempted this on the show, so I don't know how it will work logistically. But we have a cat named Jelly Bean, I mentioned earlier, who's, I think my wife would know, I think he's 15, 16, 17. It's an old ass cat. And he's been having some problems with his kidneys and blood in the urine and some stuff that's kind of problematic. Do you think we could give it a shot? If I bring him up here, if I can keep him contained for a couple minutes, that you would be able to do some work on him?
Absolutely, yeah. Let's just see what shows up. I'll show you how it works. In fact, we can, if you want, we can use the body code. And just really quickly, the body code is it consists of all the different kinds of imbalances that I have found over the last 35 years that people and animals tend to have. So that will include more possibilities besides just emotions.
Cool.
So we can use the emotion code first and see what shows up and then go from there. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's try
cool.
it.
All right. I'm going to go downstairs and see if I can grab him. Like I said, he's a little squirrely. I don't know if he'll let me hold him for long enough, but we'll give it a try. And if it doesn't work, then at least it'll be entertainment for everyone.
Let's do it.
I'll be right back.
Okay. So we're going to see if we can't release a trapped emotion here from Jelly Bean. And so let's see here. I can test Jelly Bean myself. That'd be probably the easiest way to do it, huh? Okay. So we do teach methods of self-testing. And so what we'll do here is we'll ask, all right, Jelly Bean, is your name Jelly Bean? Yes. All right. So do you have a trapped emotion we can release that is contributing to any of your issues? Yes. So here's our chart of emotions. And so we'll ask, all right, what emotion is this? Is it listed in column A? And that's a no. So it's in B. Is it in one of the odd rows? Is it in row 1? Yes. Is it effort unreceived? No. Is it heartache or insecurity? It's an emotion of insecurity. Okay. Aww. So do we need to know more about this? Not really. So to release this, we'll just do 1, 2, 3 swipes down to her governing meridian. And did we release that? We did. Okay. So next question. Do you have another trapped emotion we can release? Yes. And is this one in column A? No, it's in column B. Is it in one of the odd rows? Yes. So it's in column B, 1, 3, or 5. Is it in 1 or 3 or 5? It's in 5. Is it conflict? Is it creative insecurity? Is it terror? It's actually an emotion of terror. Do we need to know more about this? We do. Okay, so she's about 14 probably?
He's turning 17.
Oh, yeah. Okay, turning 17.
Yeah.
Wow. And so did this happen earlier than age 10? Yes. Earlier than 5? Earlier than 3? Around 3, 4? Around age 4? Have you had him the whole time?
Yeah, I have.
So something happened.
Around age 4.
Around age 4. Yeah. Something scary. Could have been a dog or who knows. Do we know more about it? Not really. So that's how that works. So what we'll do now is we'll release that emotion. Terror. Yeah. Release that. There we go, kitty. Okay, so now we can ask, do you have another trapped emotion that we need to release? No. So if we shift over to the body code, yeah, you needed that, huh? Animals, it's amazing how they respond. And oh gosh, it's just so crazy. So fun. So the body code is, it's a knowledge base really of all the different kinds of things that can go wrong. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to ask if there's something in the body code that we need to work on with you, Jelly. And the answer is yes. So what's this first thing? Is it something on the left side? No. Is it a pathogen of some kind? Could be, but it's not. Is it a misalignment? Yes. It's some kind of a misalignment. Now, any tissue in the body can misalign, right? So we've got 6 different categories. Is it something on the left side? No. And it's his subconscious mind that's giving these answers to me, and I'm just manifesting them on my own body as strength or weakness. Is it in the skeleton? It is. Now, we don't exactly have a cat skeleton here, but what we do, things have their counterparts, right? So we look at the human skeleton in here to try to figure out, okay, what is it? And let's just see. So is it something in the vertebral column? It is. Is it in the low back, lower, upper? So it's in the neck somewhere. So it's the uppermost bone in his neck. And so what we can do, okay. Here we go, kitty. Just relax. Is there a reason for this this bone to be out of alignment? Yeah. And is it a trapped emotion? So see, trapped emotions are usually the underlying cause of misaligned things. And so what we'll do is we'll ask, okay, what emotion is this? Is it in column A or B? It's in B. Is it in one of the odd rows? Is it in row 1? Is it effort unreceived or heartache, insecurity over joy, or it's an emotion of vulnerability, feeling vulnerable? Do we need to know more about this? Not really, but watch, I want to show you something. If you can hold this arm straight out, just resist me, hold it. If I come in and we test this very top bone, okay, ready? Just resist. Feel how that's weak? Watch, resist, hold it. So if I'm not touching that, you're strong. If we go to that first bone in there, feel how that's weak?
Yeah.
So now if we release that emotion of vulnerability, okay. Now if we come back and we check that very, very first bone, ready? Just resist. See how that's strong?
Yeah.
There we go. So we just corrected that misaligned
Wow.
first vertebrae.
Boy, Jelly.
Oh, man.
Yeah, he's doing really well.
So cool.
Well, I can tell he's reaching his max, but he is
Yeah.
doing well.
I'm so glad you came up, Allison. There's no way he would have tolerated me
no
holding
way.
him for that long.
So let's ask, is there, and by the way, that bone's really important. The brainstem lies inside that bone. If the brainstem dies, they unplug you, right? And I don't know the cat's anatomy, but I assume it's probably similar. Is there some other imbalance we need to work on? Anything else you have for us? Not really. So that was it.
Yay!
Yeah.
Just
Wow.
enough time. Thank you, Jelly Boy.
Thanks, Jelly.
What a good sport.
Oh,
Really
wow.
cute.
Thank you so much for doing that.
Sure, yeah, you're so welcome.
Yeah, he just went to the vet recently, and for a cat his age, he's in really overall good health. I don't want to take your mic. You take that one. I'll lean back to this
okay.
one. But he's about to be 17, and he's lived a lot of places, and and I've had him since he was born. So he has been in my life since before I even had my spiritual awakening. Like he knows pre-awakened Allison, post-awakened Allison, and every thread fiber in between. Like that cat has held space for me as a true master wizard. And
That's beautiful.
so, yeah, it just feels good to, of course, we have our own communication and ways with him, but it's nice to have someone else who's very masterful in their craft to be able to give insight and healing support in a way that we all have our things we can do and not do, and you brought something different. So thank you.
Well, so he had insecurity and vulnerability and terror, right? So those were emotional energies trapped in his body that can be manifesting as various different kinds of things, physical conditions, behavioral problems, and so on. So, and then that upper bone was out of alignment, and that can affect everything downstream. The brain has to communicate with all the organs and all the tissues by passing through that choke point. And that bone was not happy. That was out of alignment. And so by clearing that, hopefully that will, add some years to his life, hopefully, and help him to function better and feel better.
Yeah.
Be happier. You might notice some changes. You'll have to let me know.
I hope so. Yeah, in the vet appointment this past week, it's not a new thing because Persian cats are apt to be have some renal stuff and some like bladder crystals in their urine stuff, and he's had that. It's not like it's brand new, but he had blood in his urine, and his blood work overall came back good. But he's got a couple things going on, so I'll be curious to see, like you just said, that now if maybe some of that subsides and maybe calms the system enough to where, because I feel like maybe some of the bladder stuff is maybe a little bit stress induced, although he lives an incredibly very nourished,
sedate life.
Yeah,
taken care of,
and he communicates his needs very well. He's a very vocal cat, but yeah. So thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Yeah.
All right.
Awesome. Thanks, Sonny. Well, thank you so much for indulging us here in our family of pets and humans. That was a really neat experience to watch that.
That was fun.
And I know, to some people who are of the kind of logical, linear, skeptic mind, they're going to be going, what the hell? How does he know his fingers, he's not just thinking his fingers are strong when he's doing the muscle testing. Obviously, you've been at this 35 years. So to me, it's completely within the realm of possibilities, but I'm glad we were able to contextualize this kind of work in such a rich conversation, and then get to do that. And also just thank you, because we love our cat. And
sure,
one can expect that an animal is going to develop problems when they're, getting to their final years and all that. So it's not like a shock that he's having some troubles, but it would be nice for him to have, his last however many years be, free of as much suffering as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was really happy to do that. I love working on animals. It's so fun. So that was really enjoyable. Well, it's interesting because Albert Einstein and Nikola Tesla said a couple of things that I think bear repeating. Nikola Tesla said, if you want to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And Einstein said the medicine of the future will be the medicine of frequencies. Nobody knew what he was talking about. And by and large, medicine is not the medicine of frequencies in the world, but what's happening is this new medicine of frequencies is beginning to gain ground. And what does it look like? Well, it doesn't look anything like Western medicine. It looks like what we just did, really. And it can look like other things as well. But being kind of a linear thinker myself and having been a computer programmer, the beautiful thing about the emotion code and the body code and now the belief code, it makes it accessible for someone who doesn't know anything about anything, anatomy or biology or anything, to really take back that healing birthright, I think, that belongs to every one of us, to be able to heal ourselves and heal our lives and heal our family members. There's always going to be a need for Western medicine, right? People are always going to need dramatic, urgent kinds of care. But most of the time, most people don't need some kind of a drug or some kind of surgery. That's the exception rather than the rule. Most of the time, people can help themselves just by getting rid of their emotional baggage. And that's what the Emotion Code does so well and so simply. And one of the nice things about it, too, is that you don't have to go back and relive that experience. And that worked, for Jelly, too. I mean, he didn't have to go back and relive any of those traumatic things.
I mean, that's one of the difficult elements of working through PTSD, trauma, and so on, is that if it's not done with reverence and prudence, someone can be re-traumatized, right? That's the thing. I think you have a lot of
That's true.
ad hoc healers out there that are kind of winging it. God bless them. I mean, I'm sure most of them have positive intentions, but when you're going into the realm of the subconscious mind and painful experiences that people have had, it can be a bit dangerous. I mean, I know myself. I've gone into healing experiences with the best of intentions and have walked out feeling worse. It wasn't held in the kind of space that needed to be held, so that I didn't have to relive those things in the process of getting rid of them.
Yeah, right. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. We just finished filming a woman who was she was a policewoman on the Chicago Police Department, Chicago PD. And when she left because she was suicidal and nobody knew about it, but it was because of all the trauma that she'd experienced on the force and all the horrific things that happened every single day, shootings and knifings and stabbings and all kinds of crazy things. And she left the force, and for about the next 3 years was just trying to find a way out of this and tried everything. And her mother introduced her to the Emotion Code, and she was furious about it because she had tried everything and nothing was working. But her mother finally talked her into it, and she agreed. And she wrote out her suicide note and dated it 90 days in the future and started using the Emotion Code. And by the end of that 90 days, she was completely well. And we just finished filming her. And again, that's the nice thing about the Emotion Code, is she didn't have to go back to any of those experiences and relive them. She was able to just remove the emotional baggage from those things. And then the result was it completely changed her and healed her.
Incredible.
Yeah.
All right. I'm sure many people listening or watching are either going to want to find a practitioner to work with in this capacity, or learn how to become a practitioner. And I know a lot of what you do is training. You said you had a few thousand of these just trainees around the world?
13,000 people so far in about 80 countries, I think, around the world.
That's wild. No wonder you need a plane if you're doing the training. Something that I really enjoy having people on, is, of course, enabling people to find practitioners so that they can facilitate their own healing. Mm-hmm. But I think, especially after what we've gone through in the past 3 or 4 years, there are many people out there who lost their jobs or lost the meaning and purpose that they thought they had or hoped they had in their job.
Yeah.
And I've noticed there's an emergence of people that really want to, celebrate and expand on their healing capacities and work as a practitioner in some way, right? And so it's exciting to me when we have people on the show where it's It's like, cool. Does this thing sound interesting to you? Well, you could go see someone and get treated, but you can also essentially build your own business. And I think that's really exciting. I get questions from people all the time. Oh man, I'm, working at X, Y, and Z job and it's just not fulfilling. I know it's not my purpose. I want to be of greater service to people. I want to be involved in wellness and the healing arts, but I don't know what to do. So maybe you could walk us through what that looks like first in terms of people finding a practitioner and how that works remotely or in person. And then also, what does the training entail? Where does it happen? How often? How can people find that out if they're interested in learning themselves?
Sure, Luke. Well, yes, we have our certification program right now consists of 3 levels. We have the emotion code. That's level 1. And it's a program that is all done online at this point.
Oh, okay, cool.
So people can access it from anywhere. To find information about certification, you go to Discover Healing. That's our website, discoverhealing.com. And so level 1 certification is emotion code. Once you've done that one, and that one, you have 6 months to do it. And most people do it in about half the time. The record is about 9 days. So you can do it rapidly if you want to. And it consists of video modules. I think there are 10 modules online. Once you are done with the modules, you've taken the quizzes. There's no final exam because people have final exam, phobias. So it's just quizzes as you go. And then once you've completed all that work, then you start actually working on friends and family members and so on. And you record whatever you do with them, the emotion code sessions you do, online in a secure portal. And then you have, I believe it's 5 animals that you need to work on, because we want you to have that experience of working with those 5 animals, because we figure probably at least 2 or 3 of those animals are going to have some kind of an issue, and you're probably going to see those issues resolve. And so that from that, sometimes we have practitioners that just choose to work with animals only. And so that's the path they take, which is really fun.
Cool.
Yeah. So that's emotion code is level 1 certification. Once that's done, you can go to level 2, which is body code certification. Same thing. It's a 6-month program, but you can do it as quickly as you want to. Most people finish in about half the time. And that teaches you about the body code and how to find all kinds of other imbalances going on in the body by accessing the subconscious mind. And those are things like pathogens and misalignments and nutritional issues and deficiencies and things and toxins and disconnections between the spirit and the physical body and problems with the meridians and the chakras and things like that. Not to mention, of course, trapped emotions and traumas like we talked about earlier. And then our last level of certification for now, we'll eventually have 4, but our 3rd level of certification is the belief code. And the belief code is, the prerequisite for that is body code certification level 2. And the belief code is a way to access the subconscious mind, the internal computer, to identify negative belief systems that people have. A negative belief system is, you can think of it as being kind of like a tree with roots that's a faulty core belief about yourself or the world or people, and then limiting beliefs and negative programs, which are kind of like the trunk and the branches and the leaves and so on. And you're able to identify those and actually delete those from the subconscious mind. And we're having phenomenal results all over the world now with this. Really exciting. We might have to do another show just about that.
That's very cool. So give me a couple examples. Would that be someone's beliefs around their capacity for financial abundance or security? Or
it could be about anything. It could be about
relationships.
Yeah, they can affect you in lots of ways. When we feel like we're stuck in some way in our life and we've released the emotional baggage about that, the subconscious mind, you see, may have, it may be containing these negative beliefs. And the problem is the conscious mind, it's kind of like this. It's like the conscious mind is the size of a tugboat, and your subconscious mind is like the size of the Queen Mary, right? And if the tugboat wants to go this direction, but the Queen Mary is going that way, that's the way you're going. You're not going to go in the conscious direction if your subconscious mind determines otherwise. And we now have a way to truly access the subconscious mind in a very rapid way figure out what these statements are, what these beliefs are, and they exist in the subconscious mind. So we can't change consciously held beliefs. If you believe that the sky's blue or that that red's your favorite color, you can't change those. But you see, the subconscious mind is very different from the conscious mind. The subconscious mind never draws, it never makes judgments. It only draws conclusions. And so if, for example, when you're growing up, your dad tells you over and over, you're never going to amount to anything. You're never going to amount to anything. The subconscious mind might eventually decide, okay, we're never going to amount to anything. And then that belief becomes part of its operating system, you see. And so then no matter what you want to do with your conscious mind, if the subconscious mind is opposed to that, good luck, because you're going to struggle. And when it comes to money, for example, people that have subconscious beliefs about money, about not deserving, for example, things like that, you'll see people that will achieve success and then they'll lose it. And they'll achieve it again and then lose it. But it can be about all kinds of things. I mean, for example, we've all met people who continue to choose the wrong kind of mate that's abusive over and over. Where does that come from? Well, often it comes from these negative subconscious beliefs. So anyway, on our website at discoverhealing.com, there's a map, a Google map of the world, and you can see all of our practitioners that do emotion code, and body code, and belief code. And you can find someone to work with you, or if you want to, you can learn how to do this yourself. We encourage everybody to read the emotion code book and use it. Practice on your friends, on your family members, on your loved ones, because you're going to see amazing things happen. You can learn it, work on your animals, your pets, etc. If you want to do it as a living and do it for other people, or if you just want to really accelerate your learning process and learn it better, faster, then the certification program is a great way to go because it gives you rails to run on. And so that's all at discoverhealing.com.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. And we're going to put all the show notes, you guys, at lukestorey.com/Dr. Bradley. So if there are other books, links, concept we've talked about that we can track down, we'll put those in the show notes. All right, last question here. Who have been 3 teachers or teachings that have impacted your life that you'd like to share with us? Could be in any realm of expertise.
Oh, gosh. Well, let's see. I would say that, as a Christian, the teachings of Christ have had a huge effect on my life because really, again, what I think he was really trying to teach was about unconditional love, right? Do unto others as you'd have them do to you, and so on. And I think that prayer has been such a really critical part of all of this, because having that habit of asking for help and having those experiences that didn't happen certainly every day or even every year or every other year, but once in a while, those really powerful downloads that would come in response to that, that was a huge thing. So what was the question?
3 teachers or teachings.
Oh, 3.
Yeah, okay. You got one down.
Got one down.
That's a big one. I mean, Christ could cover all 3, but if there are a couple more, it's one of my favorite things to ask people. And every once in a while I forget at the end of a show, but it's always interesting because it'll range from, Buddha, Christ, from figures that would be maybe more obvious to some. And sometimes it's like my dog or my husband or my wife or an experience in life or a professor that I had in college that, really gave me confidence and so on. So that's why I like to ask that, because sometimes it's someone of some notoriety and sometimes it's very personal and someone that only the guest would know.
Yeah. I think that, my brother, Bruce, who's passed on now, was just a phenomenal individual and a phenomenal healer. And we used to joke that I had a left brain and he had a right brain, and between the two of us, we had one functioning brain. But he was totally right-brained and just so open and an amazing healer. And there have been so many people in my life, but my parents and I would say the other person really was my mother, who was considered a health nut, back when people actually did think you were kind of nuts if you took vitamins, back, when I was a kid. And, but she was very knowledgeable and brilliant. And, my brothers and I, and my two brothers-in-law, we all ended up going to chiropractic school at different times. And, but there was a period of time when we were all in school together. But it was funny because, my next oldest brother and I, for example, we'd learn new things all the time in school. And we'd go home and we would try to stump our mother, and we never could. She always knew somehow. She was way smarter than us. And then that had a tremendous effect on me. And then really I'm going to add one more, and that's my father, who one day in the winter of 1983-84 asked me this question. He said, "Are you sure?" Because at the time I was about 6 months away from going into the MBA program at Brigham Young University and getting my master's in business. And I was really into computers then, and business and automation and everything else. And he said, "Are you sure that you don't want to go to chiropractic school? It seems like a great career and you've always wanted to do that." And I said, "No, I'm going this other direction." And he said, "Well, why don't you think about it one more time?" And so he caught me at kind of a funny moment. I said, "Well, okay." I was young, and my wife and I, she was with me. We had one baby girl. And so we made up a pro and con list about these two different paths, right? And they were both, they're both compelling. But having learned that you can get answers to prayer, that night I got on my knees and I prayed and I asked God to help me to know which way to go, if he had anything to say about this, because I was open now. Suddenly I could go either way. So that night I had this experience where I was awakened 3 different times. And when I would wake up, I would have all these warm, happy thoughts about healing people naturally, and serving people. And I would think, well, yeah, but the new IBM PC has a 4 megahertz processor. And I'd fall back asleep. And so that happened 3 times that night. So the next night I'm on my knees again asking for help. And on that second night, I had this experience where I was awakened again 3 times. And each time that I was awakened, those thoughts were exponentially more powerful, if you can imagine. So that on the third time, on the second night that I was awakened, the thoughts of service to mankind and humanity and the whole world were absolutely overwhelming. And right then I heard a voice that spoke to me, and it said, "This is a sacred calling." And I thought, okay, I get it. I accept, right? And I didn't know what that meant. I'm still learning what it means. But if my father had not asked me that question, "Are you sure you don't want to go to chiropractic school? It seems like a great career." If he hadn't asked me that, I wouldn't be sitting here. So I guess those are my 4 for today.
Beautiful. I love it, man. Well, this has been a great conversation. I'm excited to meet you. This one's been on the books. I mean, I'm thinking back, there's been, I think, emails back and forth between our teams, our relative teams. And it was like, one of these days it's going to happen, because I've been aware of your work. I've had your book on my shelf for a long time. Like, one of these days it's going to work out. And then I was scared when your plane was in the shop. I was like, oh no, man, here we go again. So I'm really glad, you subjected yourself to public transit to get here. And
It was fine.
Hope your trip back home goes well. It's just really lovely to meet you. And thank you for the work you're contributing to the world. And I'm so glad your dad asked you that question too.
Right? Yeah. You never know. I mean, sometimes the smallest thing can have amazing consequences that we do, right? So, and this show may be one of those things. So thank you for having me on. It's really been great to be here. So fun to meet you and your wife and Jewel. Jelly Bean. Belly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And I'll keep you posted on how he's doing. I'll be curious to see his attitude over the next few days.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
All right.